What is a life worth when it is traded for steel? That is the question that lingers like smoke through the bones of this tale, curling into every corner of its truth. In lands where the drums of old still echo through forest and fire, there were stories, not just of glory and beasts, but of quiet betrayals carved deep into the hearts of young women. There was a time not so far from now when a daughter's fate could be sealed with the clink of metal, the nod of a father's head, and the rustle of a bride priced too sharp to refuse. In one such village, tucked between the hills that breathed mist and the plains that watched with open eyes, traditions were not questioned. They were obeyed. The elders spoke and the ground itself seemed to listen. Warriors were revered, strong men with blood-stained spears and hollow pasts. And families, desperate for survival or honor, often saw in them not sons-in-law but answers. Protection, power, pride. And sometimes, when misfortune clouded the home and hunger stalked the children, a daughter became currency. Not because she was unloved but because she was all that was left to give. This story begins with such a trade. A girl, young and blooming like the first fruit of a shy tree, was given away not with joy, but with a silent pact between fear and need. Her name was Adaku. And her family, once proud, had found itself crumbling under the weight of debts and the shame of failed harvests. When the warrior came, tall as legend, cloaked in mystery, his sword gleaming like the moon's cold eye, her father bowed. Her mother wept quietly but said nothing. And Adaku, though her heart beat like a trapped bird, obeyed. But this is not just a tale of a reluctant bride. This is not just a whisper from the past about marriage without love. It is about what happened on that first night, the night when Adaku became a wife, and the mask the warrior wore began to crack. Something was revealed in the darkness of that wedding hut. Something terrible. Something ancient. And when the first scream cut through the silence, it was not the cry of a girl in pain. It was the cry of a world breaking open. You see, in many African folktales, tradition is both a shield and a knife. It can protect, but it can also wound. It can offer strength, or it can bind you until you cannot breathe. And within these traditions, sometimes the most horrifying stories are not about witches or monsters but about people. About choices. About the things we are willing to sacrifice for safety, and the prices we must pay when we do. This story, like all stories worth remembering, has been passed in hushed tones, from grandmother to grandchild, from fire to fire, changing shape with each telling but never losing its truth. For what happened that night shook the entire clan. It forced the elders to look into the shadows of their decisions, and it made every father think twice before trading blood for blade. So if you've ever wondered what lies behind the quiet eyes of a bride, or what secrets a warrior might carry in his silence, listen closely. This tale is not for the faint-hearted. It's for those who understand that horror does not always wear the face of a beast. Sometimes it wears a crown. Sometimes it wears a smile. Before we begin, I invite you to sit with this story, really sit with it. Let it settle into your bones. If you felt the pull of duty against the current of your own will, this story is yours. If you've ever questioned the choices of those who came before you, this story is yours. And if you are drawn to the eerie, the unsettling, and the deeply human, then welcome. You're in the right place. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy the deep and dark corners of African folklore. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have obeyed as Adaku did? Would you have walked into that union blind, or would your feet have fled? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but disturb, awaken, and echo long after the telling. Because what happened to Adaku wasn't just a wedding. It was a revelation. One that stained the soil. One that tore the veil between what is seen and what is hidden. And it all began with a sword. You said. Iwoma was not the kind of girl who filled a room with laughter or stirred the village with loud opinions. She was soft-spoken, graceful like a river at dawn, and carried a stillness that made even the loudest heart pause. She moved through life as though she had been born from silence itself, with kindness tucked beneath her every gesture. But her quiet soul masked a strength that few ever saw, perhaps not even she herself. Her family, on the other hand, was no stranger to hardship. Seasons had passed with thin harvests. Her father's fishing nets returned heavier with water than with fish. Her mother's hands, once quick with weaving and trade, now trembled from illness. Hunger became a silent member of their household, sitting at their fire each night, never leaving. And in the small village where pride and reputation were as vital as food, desperation had its own shadow, a shadow that followed Iwoma's family closer with each rising sun. Then came the warrior. He arrived on a morning thick with dust and heat, his entrance as quiet as the air before a storm. No one knew his name, only that he traveled alone and bore a sword unlike any other, a curved blade with markings no one could read, a gleam that caught the eye and never let go. His presence stirred something in the elders, something too subtle for words but too sharp to ignore. The children stopped playing when he passed. The animals grew restless. He went straight to Iwoma's father's compound, his sword strapped to his back like a second spine. There were no pleasantries, no riddles or greetings. Only the offer. The warrior wanted Iwoma's hand in marriage. In return he would gift them his sword, a blade he claimed was not forged by man, but born from a fallen star and cooled in the waters where spirits bathe. It would bring power, respect, protection. The warrior did not elaborate on why he wanted Iwoma, only that she was the one. His tone left no space for questions. Her father, worn from years of empty plates and hollow dreams, stared at the sword for a long time. The way it shimmered in the light, almost alive, seemed to speak to him. Her mother wept, begging him to reconsider, but her voice was small and cracked, as though she herself doubted it would matter. And Iwoma? She stood quietly at the threshold of their home, her face unreadable. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply watched her fate being sealed without her name ever being asked. The ceremonial trade happened the next evening. The village gathered beneath the Irako tree, where deals were blessed and spirits were asked to bear witness. The elders chanted old incantations, though their voices lacked the certainty such rituals usually carried. A table was placed between the warrior and Iwoma's family. Upon it the sword was laid. Its glow seemed stronger in the twilight, pulsing softly with something that felt both alive and wrong. When the eldest among them reached out to touch it, he flinched, just barely, but enough for others to notice. Yet no one spoke of it. The marriage was declared. No songs were sung. Iwoma stood still beside the warrior, her hands folded, her lips pressed tight. Her eyes scanned the faces in the crowd, hoping perhaps that someone might object, that a voice might rise, declaring this trade unjust, unnatural. But the silence was deeper than any river. Her sisters turned away. Her cousins wept into their hands. Her father stood tall, proud even as if wealth now flowed in their blood. That night, under a moon that looked far too close, the warrior led her from the village. No procession followed. No lanterns lit the path. She carried no dowry. Only a small satchel with a change of cloth and a comb carved by her late grandmother. And sorrow. So much sorrow it weighed heavier than the sword. She did not look back. But if she had, she would have seen the eyes of the elders watching her, not with joy but with worry. The warrior had given them something more than steel. Something they did not yet understand. Something that shimmered in the dark and whispered of old, forgotten things. The people of the village would speak little of that night in the days to come. But deep in their hearts each of them knew, this was not a marriage. It was a transaction. And the price, though unseen, had only just begun to be paid. That was how Iwoma was taken. Traded like a sack of yam for a sword that shone too brightly. And though her voice was never asked for, though her choice was stolen, her spirit remained unbroken, even if she didn't yet know it. And what happened next would make every elder in the village regret that they ever let steel outweigh a daughter's soul. Ogre. That was the only name he gave. A name that felt more like a sound carved from stone than a word spoken from the tongue. He never smiled, never laughed, and never wept, not even during his own wedding ceremony. He was a towering figure, wrapped in a strange armor that shimmered in moonlight and never bore a single scratch. The armor never left his body. Not at night, not in the river, not even when the sun boiled the village earth. It clinked softly when he moved, yet not a soul ever saw how it came on, or if it ever came off. He lived with Iwoma in a hut on the edge of the village, near the boundary where the forest pressed its breath close to human life. No one had dared live there before, not since the ancient stories of spirits crossing over in the dark. But Ogre claimed the land without hesitation, built his home with his bare hands in less than a week, and dared any elder to speak against him. None did. From the first day he unsettled the village. He never joined the men during palm wine gatherings, never danced during moon festivals, and always declined the offerings made by neighbors after harvest. Food left at his door remained untouched, the yams sometimes rotting without a single bite taken. The only person he ever spoke to in low and careful words was Iwoma, and even she began to feel like a stranger in her own skin. The people noticed. Of course they did. In a village where every name was tied to family and lineage, Ogre's absence of origin made him a threat. No one knew his mother's name, his father's title, or even what land he called home. He offered no clan markings, no childhood tales. It was as though he had appeared from the earth itself, already grown, already armored, already watching. Children began to fear him. Animals avoided him. Even the village dogs, known for their curious spirits, tucked their tails when he passed, their ears pressed flat against their skulls. But it wasn't just his behavior. It was the strange things that followed him like shadows stretching toward something unseen. Goats would bolt when he neared, their eyes wide with a fear too primal to fake. Birds went silent when he entered the forest. Even the trees around his compound began to bend slightly away, as if whispering among themselves, trying to avoid his reach. Elders began to speak in hushed voices about the signs, the way the air shifted near his home, the way fireflies danced erratically when he walked at night. One boy, too brave for his own good, claimed to have followed Ogre late one evening, hoping to catch a glimpse of the warrior's secret. He returned before dawn, trembling and pale, and never spoke again. His mother said he woke each night whispering in a voice not his own, whispering words in no tongue they understood. Then there were the dreams. People near Ogre's home began to have visions, of dark waters swallowing the village, of iron gates in the sky, of a man with glowing eyes standing beneath a bleeding moon. And Ewoma began to change too. She stopped attending market. Her laughter, already rare, disappeared entirely. Her eyes seemed distant, not empty, but remembering something that had not yet happened. She moved through the village like a ghost of herself, and when anyone asked if she was well, she nodded, but her voice had a weight that hinted otherwise. One night, a heavy storm rolled in with no warning. Thunder cracked open the sky like a drum of war, and lightning struck the great Irako tree in the center of the village, an omen so rare and sacred that the oldest elder could barely remember the last time it had occurred. At the center of that storm stood Ogre, watching the sky with his face turned upward, unmoved by the rain. The villagers, peering from their windows, swore they saw his eyes flash, not with fear but with something ancient and expectant. And when morning came, the tree was blackened and hollowed, but still standing. It was after that storm that the whispers grew louder. Some said Ogre was no man at all, but a forgotten warrior spirit, cursed to walk the earth until his true purpose was fulfilled. Others believed he had traded his humanity for power, much like the tales of old, where men gave their hearts to the gods for a single lifetime of strength. A few whispered darker things still, that he was not sent for Ewoma's love, but for something buried deep within her that no one yet understood. The elders debated. The youth watched. And Ewoma lived beside him like a shadow to his silence, her days growing thinner and her nights longer. No one dared confront him. Not yet. But all knew this truth: something was wrong. Deeply, irreversibly wrong. And whatever Ogre truly was, he had not come to the village merely for a bride. He had come to collect a debt. A debt no one remembered making. Yet all would soon be forced to pay. The feast was unlike any other the clan had seen in recent seasons. Drums echoed through the valley, calabashes overflowed with palm wine, and roasted game was laid out in generous heaps. But something beneath the celebration was wrong. A silence crept between the laughter, a tension that twisted the air. The villagers feigned joy, but their glances kept drifting toward the path where Ewoma would appear. No one spoke of it, but everyone felt it, the weight of a wedding that didn't feel like union but surrender. When Ewoma emerged, the drums faltered. She was dressed in the finest of silks, her skin dusted with golden powder, her head adorned with coral beads passed down from elder women. Yet she moved like a leaf in wind, slow, trembling, and pale. Her eyes did not scan the crowd, they stayed fixed on the earth as though looking up might shatter her. The warrior stood waiting near the great fire. Ogre, encased as always in his armor, with no visible skin, no expression. A silent statue with a sword at his side, the same mystical blade that had gleamed during the trade, its surface still glinting unnaturally even in the fire's light. As the rites were performed, the clan chanted in practiced rhythm, but their hearts were not in it. Elders recited blessings, yet the words felt hollow, crumbling before they could reach the gods. When the final calabash of wine was poured onto the earth as an offering, the flames crackled violently, and many swore the smoke twisted into the shape of something not quite human. After the last drumbeat fell into silence, Ogre took Ewoma's hand, cold, still, and led her toward the sacred hut at the forest's edge, the place where unions were sealed, where marriage was made complete. That hut had seen centuries of love, longing, and new beginnings. Tonight it would see none of those things. No one followed them. It was tradition to leave the couple alone, to let the ancestors bear witness. But the silence that followed their retreat was not the usual hush of reverence. It was the stillness before a storm. The night stretched on. Then it came. A scream. Not of passion. Not of pleasure. A scream that tore through the sky like lightning, slicing through laughter and drink. It was followed by another. And then silence. The elders hesitated. This was forbidden, no one interrupted the sacred union. But something in that scream clawed at every instinct, defied every rule. When they reached the hut, they found the door flung open, the wind inside unnatural, spiraling around the room in slow, heavy circles. The fire at the center had died. The mats were untouched. And Iwoma, she was there, crouched against the far wall, her wedding cloths torn, her eyes wide with unspeakable horror. But it was not her state that froze the elders, it was what was missing. Ogre was gone. The armor he had never once removed, lay empty on the ground, crumpled like a shed skin. Not a trace of blood. Not a footprint. No sign of escape. Only the armor and the sword. The sword had changed. Once silver, it now lay on the ground like a charred bone, black and lifeless. The air around it shimmered the way heat does above fire, but there was no warmth, only a deep, gnawing cold. Iwoma could barely speak. Her lips trembled and her voice came in gasps. He wasn't a man, he showed me. They tried to coax her, to pull her words from the pit of her shock, but she only kept pointing to the sword, to the armor. Finally she whispered. He screamed too, not in pain, in fear. The elders stepped forward cautiously. One of them tried to touch the armor, and yanked his hand back with a cry. It was ice cold, colder than the river in the Harmattan months. Another touched the sword's handle and fainted instantly, his breath stolen as if the blade had pulled something from him. The hut was sealed. They carried Iwoma out gently. She had stopped crying by then, but not because she had calmed. Her tears had simply run out. Her face was dry, but her eyes were hollow. The next morning the sun rose, but the birds did not sing. The sword remained black, unmoved. The armor stayed cold. And Ogre was never seen again. No trail. No farewell. No corpse. Only Iwoma's shaking voice, repeating a phrase she couldn't understand and would never forget. He shed his skin, and what came out wasn't meant for this world. The elders called it a sign. The villagers called it a curse. And the forest? The forest whispered nothing at all, just rustled softly, like it had been waiting for this all along. The day after the wedding, the village was consumed by whispers. People avoided the path to the sacred hut, and no one dared speak too loudly in the open. The elders gathered in silence, their faces grim, their hands restless with worry. A girl had been traded for a sword. A wedding had turned to horror. A man had vanished into nothingness. Or worse, into something that had never been a man at all. Word was sent to the hills to summon the village seer, the ancient one who lived alone among the stones, said to speak with spirits and sleep beneath the stars. He had been absent from the ceremony, some say deliberately, but when he arrived the air itself seemed to grow heavier. He came walking slowly, leaning on a twisted staff carved with runes no one could read. His eyes were clouded but sharp as ever. His voice, when he spoke, trembled the leaves. "You were warned," he said, not as a scold but as a fact. "You were given a blade and you thought it was a gift. It was not. It was a prison." The villagers sat in silence, surrounding him near the village fire. The sword lay nearby, still black, untouched since the wedding night. The armor sat beside it like a husk, useless and empty. The seer bent near the sword, muttering words that made the fire flinch. When he rose, he turned to them all and began the tale that would unravel everything they thought they knew. Long ago, before the founding of the village, before even the rivers had settled into their winding paths, there was a spirit, a warrior who had once been man but had long since become something else. He had sought power beyond what the gods allowed, trying to cheat death and bend the world to his will. In his arrogance, he angered the spirit guardians of the land, and they struck him down. But such was his strength and fury that he did not die. Instead, the guardians bound him. They sealed his soul into a blade, an ancient sword crafted by fire and shadow, cursed to hold him until time itself forgot his name. That sword was passed down through hidden hands, never to be used, never to be drawn. It was buried, dug up, stolen, hidden again. And slowly, it made its way back to the world of the living. "The sword is not cursed because it brings misfortune," the seer said. "It is cursed because it remembers what it was made to contain." The warrior's spirit inside had waited centuries for a weakness. And that weakness had finally come, in the form of a poor family desperate enough to trade their daughter for steel. Ogre was never a man. He was the shadow within the blade, shaping itself into flesh when the seal was loosened. The armor had hidden his formless nature. The silence was not discipline but danger. He had mimicked humanity only enough to walk among it. The wedding was not a marriage. It was a ritual. Each step, The trade, the feast, the consummation, was part of an ancient rite designed not to bless but to break. The last part was the binding of a soul pure and vulnerable enough to unlock the final seal. Iwoma had not been chosen by chance. Her kindness, her innocence, her sorrow, it was all fuel. She was not meant to be a bride, the seer said, his voice tight with grief. She was meant to be a vessel. In giving herself, in being given away, she had completed what generations before her had worked to prevent. The elders asked if the spirit had now been released. No, the seer said. Not fully. Ogre's scream had been real. He had tried to take full form, but something went wrong. Perhaps Iwoma's will had resisted. Perhaps the sword, in its hatred of the spirit it housed, had turned on him in those final moments. Whatever the reason, the ritual had faltered. The blade had turned black, not because it had lost power but because it had tasted freedom and failed. But he is awake now, the seer whispered. And he will try again. Iwoma, pale and quiet, listened from the shadows. She had not spoken much since that night, but now she stepped forward, her voice small but steady. I saw his face, she said. Not a face of man or beast but a thing of flame and sorrow. He begged me, not with words but with feeling. He wanted out. And he wanted me to let him out. The seer nodded solemnly. Because you were the key. You still are. Iwoma looked at the blade, her hands trembling. What now? The seer leaned on his staff and looked to the sky. Now the sword must be guarded. Watched by those strong enough not to be tempted, wise enough not to listen to its whispers. Because it will whisper. The elders wanted to bury it, but the seer warned against it. The earth cannot hold him. Fire cannot burn him. Only the will of the living can keep him bound. So they built a shrine far from the village, a place lined with ash and sacred salts, a place no one entered alone. And the sword was placed there not as a treasure but as a warning. As for Iwoma, she was never the same. She carried the echo of that night inside her. Not fear but knowledge. The kind of knowledge that changes how you walk, how you see, how you live. She was no longer just the girl who was traded for a sword. She was the one who looked into the eyes of a spirit and lived. The villagers learned to speak her name with reverence, not just for what she endured but for what she prevented. Because had the ritual succeeded, had Ogre fully returned, the sword would not have stayed black. It would have burned the world. After the night that shattered the silence of the village, Iwoma was not the same. Something in her had shifted, like a river that had changed course during the night. The Iwoma who had once bowed her head, spoken softly and obeyed without question, now walked with a presence that stirred the very air around her. At first it was subtle. Her gaze lingered longer, her voice held a weight it hadn't before, and her footsteps, once timid, now echoed with silent resolve. She began to dream, and in those dreams there was always fire. Flames curling like fingers around ancient spears, battle cries in tongues she did not know, and shadows of warriors long forgotten. She saw lands she'd never visited, saw her hands bloodied, gripping the blackened sword that had once been her dowry. In the dreams she was not herself. Or rather she was herself, but more. When she woke, her heart pounded with the rhythm of drums from a war long past. Her fingers twitched as if still holding a blade. Her voice sometimes slipped into languages no one in the village recognized. She began to speak of things buried in time, battles, names, sacred rituals. Elders listened in quiet terror, for how could she know these things? Then came the animals. It started with birds that gathered at her window in the mornings, silent and still. Then a snake was seen coiled near her doorway, not striking, just watching. Even the village dogs, once loud and restless, would lower their heads when she passed. The children whispered that the forest bowed to her, and the old ones dared not correct them. Iwoma, once the traded daughter, now became something else, something other. The people grew wary. They watched her movements. Some made signs of protection when she walked by. Others brought her offerings, bread, herbs, tokens of goodwill, not out of affection but out of fear. Not fear of harm but fear of unbalance, for they sensed that within her, something ancient stirred. She felt it too. It was not possession, not entirely. It was more like a merging. She would find herself moving in ways she hadn't learned, lifting heavy stones with ease, speaking words before she knew their meaning. In mirrors or still water, she sometimes glimpsed another version of herself, a shadow of a warrior with eyes like fire and a scar that ran from his brow to his jaw. One night, as she stood in the clearing beyond the village, she heard the voice, not spoken aloud but from deep within. We are bound, you and I. She knew it was him. Ogre. Or the spirit that had once been known as such. She closed her eyes and answered, What do you want from me? To finish what was started. She did not know what that meant, not fully, but each day after she began to understand a little more. From the seer, she learned the legends, the unfinished mission of the warrior who had been sealed in the blade. He had sought to challenge the gods themselves, not for vengeance, but to reclaim what had been stolen, a truth, a memory, a name. Iwoma, the seer told her, he was never meant to be freed. But now that he is within you, you carry more than his strength. You carry his debt. At first she resisted. She tried to live normally. She returned to her family, tried to help with harvest, tried to laugh at market stalls. But it never felt right. Her hands itched for the hilt of the sword now buried in the shrine. Her nights were haunted by visions. Her body remembered dances of war her mind had never learned. The clan saw the change. They began to call her the vessel. Some feared she would bring destruction. Others whispered she might protect them from the darkness that had once nearly consumed them. But all agreed on one thing: she was no longer just a girl. She had become legend. One day a boy fell sick, his skin turned pale, his breath came ragged. None of the herbs worked, not even those passed down by Obinna, the late herbalist. In desperation they brought him to Iwoma. She laid her hands upon his chest, closed her eyes, and spoke in a voice that wasn't hers. Moments later the boy coughed, then breathed. He lived. From then on they came to her not with fear but with reverence. Still she was unsettled. For though she healed, though she helped, she knew something was missing. A task unfinished. A rage unspent. She began to write in symbols she could not read. She began to draw maps in the dirt of places that did not exist on any scroll. The seer visited again and asked her, "Do you know where you must go?" She shook her head. "Not yet. But I know I must go." He nodded slowly. The warrior's purpose was buried. You may uncover it. But beware, his anger, if fed too long, may become yours. She knew. She already felt it. Deep beneath the calm, a storm brewed. One evening, as the sun bled over the horizon, she climbed the shrine where the black sword was kept. She stood before it, not touching it, just watching. She whispered, "What was your war? And will it now be mine?" The sword did not answer. But something within her stirred. She turned and walked away, her silhouette long against the setting sun. Iwoma was not a vessel. She was awakening. Under the pale light of dawn, Iwoma stood in the dimly lit family shrine, the air thick with incense and the weight of secrets long buried. Her fingers trembled as she unrolled the ancient scrolls she had found hidden behind a loose stone in the shrine's wall. The parchments were old, their edges brittle, ink faded but still legible enough to piece together a forgotten truth. She read by the flickering light of an oil lamp, her heart thundering louder with every line. The story the scrolls told was not one passed down by the elders. It was not part of the songs sung at harvest or the chants echoed at the moon festivals. It was the kind of truth that had been buried on purpose. A tale so damning, so dangerous, that to speak it aloud would be to tear apart the foundation of the entire clan. Ogre had not been a demon. He had once been a man, a revered warrior known as Azaik the Brave, the protector of the eastern hills, and the guardian of the sacred boundary between the spiritual and mortal worlds. He had served the ancestors with loyalty, his sword defending the village from raids, curses, and the creeping dread of the forest spirits. But power, even the kind earned in service, breeds envy. And Azaik's strength made the chiefs nervous. His influence grew and so did the whispers. He was accused of sorcery, of ambition, of seeking godhood. The truth, as the scrolls whispered, was much simpler. Azaik had refused to bend to corruption. He had spoken against the elders when they used sacred lands for personal gain. And for that, they conspired against him. The final betrayal came under the guise of a peace ritual. Azaik was summoned to the council grove, offered wine laced with binding herbs, and stabbed with the very sword he had once used to defend them. A curse was woven over his dying body, trapping his spirit within the blade, condemning him to sleep in rage, waiting for release. Centuries passed. The story was twisted into a legend of a vengeful ghost warrior. The sword was hidden, then rediscovered, and eventually became a prize to be bartered in desperation, offered for a daughter's life. Iwoma closed the scrolls slowly, her mind spinning. She understood now why Ogre, the man who had stood silent and alone, draped in ancient armor, had felt so heavy, so distant. It wasn't detachment, it was the weight of centuries of betrayal. It wasn't indifference, it was restraint, the kind forged in agony and fire. On their wedding night, he had chosen not to consume her, not to carry out the final ritual by force. He had shed the armor, his cage, because her spirit had stirred something in him, perhaps a memory of mercy, of love, or simply recognition that she was not part of the wrong that had bound him. And yet, she carried him now. The dreams that felt like battles, the strength surging through her limbs, the heat in her blood, they were all fragments of Isaac's soul, transferred to her when he vanished. She was his vessel, not for destruction but for reckoning. His mission had not been revenge. It had been justice. The restoration of truth. The unmasking of the great lie. But what now? Iwoma looked out of the shrine at the sleeping village. The elders who had sold her were descendants of those who had bound Isaac. The same blood flowed through them. They upheld the old ways, clung to secrets and silenced questions. She could confront them. She could awaken the spirit fully and let his fury burn through the lies. The warrior's fire surged within her chest, a drumbeat of rage calling for action. And yet, another voice spoke, one that was still her own. A softer one, asking whether continuing the cycle of pain would truly heal what had been broken. Was there power in mercy? Was there strength in choosing to live not as a weapon but as a witness? Could she break the curse not by fulfilling it, but by refusing to? She sat in the shrine until the sun rose, casting golden light on the dust motes swirling in the air. Her decision came not as a shout but as a whisper. She would not kill for Isaac. She would speak. The truth would no longer hide in scrolls, locked in shrines. She would tell the real story, of a warrior betrayed, of a girl traded for a sword, of a curse that could not silence justice. She would not be a weapon but a storm of remembrance. Let the elders tremble. Let the shadows flee. Iwoma rose, her back straight, her eyes blazing with purpose. She was no longer the girl traded for steel. She was the keeper of a fallen warrior's truth, and she would carry it into the light. Iwoma stood still atop the sacred hill, the blackened sword firmly gripped in her hands. The weight of the weapon felt like the weight of her very destiny pressing against her chest. As the winds howled through the tall grasses around her, she could feel the pull of something ancient, something primal, calling her to finish what had been set in motion long ago. The air around her seemed thick with the lingering remnants of Ogre's anger, his rage, his desire for vengeance. The spirit of Ogre had come to her in a dream the night before, urging her to see the task through. Finish what I started. His voice had echoed through her mind, both a command and a plea. The blood that has been spilled must be avenged, but you must choose whether to perpetuate the cycle of hatred or end it. The choice is yours, Iwoma. She had awoken from the vision with a heart heavy with the knowledge of her lineage, the betrayal her ancestors had wrought, and the impossible decision before her. Could she truly release the spirit of Ogre and put an end to the bloodshed, or would she give in to the warrior's vengeance, continuing the cycle of pain and suffering that had marked her clan for generations? As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Iwoma knew what she had to do. She climbed the sacred hill with deliberate steps, the blackened sword gleaming in her grip. The blade was cold, and the air seemed to hum with power as she neared the ancient tree, the very same tree where the elders had performed their rituals centuries ago. The tree stood as a silent witness to the years of pain, betrayal, and loss that had accumulated in this land. At the base of the tree, Iwoma dug a deep hole, her hands shaking but steady. The blade, still blackened with the remnants of its dark history, gleamed in the soft light of the morning. She had come here not just to bury the sword but to bury everything it represented, the bloodshed, the betrayal, the anguish of generations. She had to break the cycle. With great care, she placed the sword in the hole and, taking a deep breath, began to chant the ancient words from the scrolls she had discovered in her family's shrine. The ritual of peace, as it was known, was meant to release the curse and the spirit trapped within the blade, but it required an offering. She would have to release the rage she had carried from Ogre, the rage that had become part of her essence. She closed her eyes, focusing all her energy on letting go. The sword trembled as if alive, as if resisting the ritual. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse with energy, but Iwoma held firm. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she knew that the power she held was not just Ogre's. It was hers as well. The power to change, to forgive, to choose peace over vengeance. The moment the final words left her lips, the sword stopped trembling. A great stillness fell over the hill. For a moment, it felt as if the world itself had paused. The air seemed to hold its breath. And then the blade turned to dust. The spirit of Ogre appeared before her, not as a vengeful entity, but as something gentler. His form, once a shadow of rage, now flickered with a quiet understanding. His face, though still stern, was now softened by gratitude. You have freed me, Iwoma. But you have also freed yourself, he said, his voice no longer harsh but calm. The wind carried his words away as he began to fade, his form dissipating into the early morning light. Iwoma stood alone, the blackened sword now nothing more than dust in the earth. She had chosen peace not just for the clan but for herself. As she descended the hill, the villagers began to gather, drawn by the change in the air, the stillness that had settled over the land. They had witnessed the ritual from a distance, unsure of what was happening. But now, as Iwoma approached them, they saw something different in her. The power she once carried, both the spirit's and her own, was gone. In its place was a quiet strength, a calm that resonated deeply with the land around her. The elders who had once been complicit in the betrayal, now stood with bowed heads. The clan, once divided by bloodshed and old secrets, now understood that their fate had been sealed not by the sword, but by the one they had traded away. Iwoma had not only saved them, she had redeemed them. The village would never be the same. But perhaps, just perhaps, it would be better. The legend of Iwoma, the woman who chose peace over vengeance, would live on, whispered by the winds that now carried no trace of rage or bloodshed. And the sword, once a tool of vengeance, was gone, its power broken, its curse lifted. In the silence that followed, the clan knew one thing for certain. Their fates had been decided not by the warrior spirit, but by the one they had traded away. The woman who had been sold for steel had, in the end, brought them the one thing they needed most: peace. The tale of Iwoma, her fateful trade for a sword, and the warrior spirit bound to her life, is not just a story of betrayal, power, or even love. It is a reflection on the long-reaching consequences of greed, deceit, and the choices we make in the face of inherited pain. Throughout history, we've seen how a single act of betrayal can ripple through generations, spreading its curse far beyond the original transgression. This is the heart of Iwoma's story, the weight of a decision made in desperation, passed down through the ages, and the haunting legacy it leaves behind. Greed, in its many forms, is often at the core of such tragedies. Iwoma's family, desperate and poor, chose wealth over the life and happiness of their daughter. In a society where power and wealth were the true currency, they saw her not as a human being with her own desires, dreams and autonomy, but as a mere commodity, a pawn to be exchanged for a blade that could grant them status and security. It was a trade that, though seemingly pragmatic at the time, set into motion a chain of events that none could have foreseen. This greed, this blindness to the value of human life over material gain, became a curse not just on Iwoma but on the entire clan. As the spirit of Ogre was released, his rage and thirst for vengeance became a manifestation of the unhealed wounds of the past. He was a protector, once a guardian of peace, yet through betrayal and injustice he became a force of retribution. His release was not a simple act of vengeance. It was a manifestation of the curse that had been passed down through the bloodline of Iwoma's family. The spirit's anger was not solely for his own suffering, but for the generations that had allowed such a betrayal to fester, for the betrayal that had been silently accepted as tradition. In this way, the sins of the past are never truly forgotten. They are woven into the very fabric of our future until someone steps forward to break the chain. But Iwoma's strength did not lie in fulfilling the mission of vengeance that Ogre sought to complete. It wasn't her desire for power or justice that allowed her to end the cycle. It was her ability to choose something far more difficult: peace. She had the power to wield the sword and finish the spirit's work. She could have let Ogre's rage consume her and the clan, exacting retribution for all the wrongs of the past. But that would have only deepened the wound, perpetuating the cycle of violence and pain. Instead, she chose to confront the dark legacy head-on, to release the curse and the spirit, and to bury the blade once and for all, not with violence but with a ritual of peace. She chose to heal, even when it meant giving up the very power she had come to wield. This, perhaps, is the truest form of strength: the ability to let go when given the power to destroy, to choose peace when it would be far easier to take the path of vengeance. Iwoma's courage did not lie in what she did to her enemies or even in how she handled her own pain. It lay in her ability to rise above the expectations placed upon her and make a choice that defied the very nature of her trade. In a world where revenge is often seen as the only way to restore honor, Iwoma showed that true strength lies in breaking the chains that bind us to old wounds. When we look at Iwoma's story, it raises a question for all of us. How many times have we been caught in the cycle of vengeance or retribution, only to discover that it does nothing but perpetuate the pain? How many times have we chosen to carry the weight of a family's sins or the weight of history, believing that the only way to move forward is to pay back what was taken? But what if, instead of continuing the cycle of vengeance, we chose to break it? What if the power to heal lies not in revenge, but in the courage to let go and seek peace, even when it seems impossible? This is the moral of Iwoma's tale. Her journey is a reminder that the wounds of the past do not have to define the future. Generational curses can be broken, not through more bloodshed but through a conscious decision to choose a different path. When faced with the ghosts of history, it is easy to give in to the desire for revenge. After all, we are often taught that revenge restores balance. But Ihuoma's story shows us that true peace requires a different kind of bravery, the bravery to let go of anger, to forgive, and to break free from the darkness that seeks to consume us. Now, as you reflect on Ihuoma's journey, I pose a question to you. If you were in her shoes, with the weight of generations of pain and betrayal on your shoulders, would you choose vengeance as many would expect, or would you have the strength to break the cycle and seek peace instead? Would you carry out vengeance for a spirit's betrayal, or would you, like Ihuoma, choose to make a final life-changing choice that ends the chain of suffering? This question isn't just theoretical. It is something we all face in our lives in one way or another. Whether it's letting go of an old grudge, forgiving a deep betrayal, or finding peace in the midst of conflict, we are all faced with choices that can either perpetuate pain or heal it. The cycle of vengeance and retribution is never-ending, but it's up to us to decide whether we will continue it or stop it in its tracks. I invite you to share your thoughts on this tale. How do you think you would have reacted if placed in Ihuoma's position? Would you have taken the path of vengeance or sought a different way? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more dark African folk tales, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful and haunting tales that reflect the lessons of our ancestors. The past may try to shape us, but it is our choices that define who we are.